You ever notice how different the world feels when everyone else is asleep? The air gets heavier, every sound sharper. The hum of your fridge suddenly feels like a whisper trying to tell you something. There's something about the dead of night that strips away the noise of the day and leaves you alone with what's really out there. And sometimes, what's out there notices you too. It always starts the same, small things you could easily ignore. A faint knock that you convince yourself came from the wind. A light flickering in the hallway, even though you changed the bulb yesterday. Maybe a shadow that moves just a bit too quickly in the corner of your eye. You tell yourself it's nothing, because what else can it be? But as the night drags on, your body knows before your mind does something isn't right. Your chest tightens, your pulse slows, and every instinct tells you not to look, not to move, just to listen. There's a strange kind of silence that only exists after midnight. Not peaceful, it's the kind that feels like the world's holding its breath, waiting for something. And sometimes, that something finds its way to your door. Imagine lying there half awake, when you hear footsteps outside your bedroom window. Slow, deliberate, gravel crunching under each step. You freeze, your heart pounding so hard you can hear it in your ears. Then, silence again. No footsteps leaving. Just waiting. One woman I read about said she used to wake up at 3:14 every single night. She thought it was insomnia, until she realized her porch light always turned on exactly a minute before she woke up. Every night. She checked the cameras, but the feed always cut out for a few seconds before she stirred awake. She told herself it was a glitch, until one night she stayed up and watched. When that porch light flicked on, she saw it. A man, standing perfectly still in the middle of her yard, staring straight into the camera. He didn't move, he didn't blink, and when the light shut off, he was gone. That's the thing about these stories. They don't happen to people who go looking for trouble. They happen to the ones who just wanted a quiet night's sleep. The ones who lived in small towns, worked normal jobs, trusted their locks, and closed their curtains. They didn't realize that sometimes the dark doesn't wait for an invitation. It just walks in. So tonight, when you turn off the lights and the world outside your window goes quiet, take a second to listen. Notice the sounds that don't belong. The soft scrape against the wall, the faint tap of something on your glass. Because the dead of night doesn't always mean nothing's out there. Sometimes it's when everything that hides from the light finally wakes up and starts looking back. There's a certain stillness that only comes at night, the kind that makes even the smallest sound feel enormous. You could be sitting in your living room, lights dimmed, scrolling on your phone when you realize the hum of the refrigerator stopped. The air feels colder, and for just a moment it feels like the house itself is holding its breath. That's usually how it begins. Not with screams or chaos, but with the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong. Most people don't notice it right away. They tell themselves it's just their imagination, that eerie weight pressing against their chest. But then something shifts. Maybe it's the soft creak of a floorboard or the low sound of movement in a room you know should be empty. It's never loud. Not enough to be sure, just enough to make your skin crawl. You wait, straining to listen, but the noise doesn't come again. It's as if whatever made it knows you're aware now, and it's waiting too. A man once said he woke up to the faint sound of whispering just outside his door. He lived alone. He thought maybe it was the neighbors, but the voices were too close, right against the wood. He leaned in, holding his breath, and that's when the whispering stopped. A few seconds later, a slow, deliberate knock. One, then silence. He didn't move for the rest of the night. When he checked the next morning, there were 3 small scratches across the door, thin, fresh, and deep enough to splinter, the paint. That's the kind of thing about nights like this. The danger doesn't always announce itself. It creeps, it lingers, it watches. You don't even realize when it starts, but you always feel when it's already there. You feel it when your cat suddenly lifts its head and stares into the hallway, when your phone screen flickers on by itself, when you hear your own name spoken softly from the dark. Someone once recorded the sound of their attic because they kept hearing movement. What they found wasn't footsteps or rats, it was breathing. Deep, human breathing, barely audible beneath the static. When they played it again, the next morning, the sound wasn't there anymore. But that night, when they pressed record a second time, the breathing came back. Closer, louder. There's no chaos in these moments, no screaming or running, just silence. That's what makes it worse. Because in that silence, your mind fills in everything it can't explain. The dark shapes become figures. The air itself feels like it's watching you. And by the time you realize that what you're hearing isn't just the house settling, it's too late. The night doesn't need to chase you. It just needs to wait, quietly, until you start to doubt what's real. And once it has that, once you've given in to that small, crawling fear in the back of your mind, it never really goes away. Every one of these stories has a name attached to it. A date, a location, police records, sometimes even photographs. They're not stories in the way we like to think of them, not exaggerated, not embellished. They happen to people who still can't explain what they saw, who still sleep with the lights on, who still glance at their windows when the night gets too quiet. Take one that came from a man in rural Illinois. He was a truck driver, used to long stretches of highway and the quiet that comes with them. He'd pulled over one night at a rest stop around 2:30 a.m., the kind of place that looks completely lifeless under the fluorescent glow. He said he noticed another truck parked a few spaces away, engine off, lights out, but someone was sitting in the driver's seat, completely still. When he glanced over again, the figure turned its head sharply toward him. He said he couldn't make out a face, just an outline, dark and unmoving. Then, the cab light of the other truck flicked on for less than a second, and the seat was empty. When police checked the lot later, they found no tire tracks from any other vehicle. Another account came from a woman who'd recently moved into a small apartment in Portland. She'd started noticing small things missing: a spoon, a shirt, a picture frame. Nothing valuable, just unsettling. One night, she came home to find her shower curtain closed, though she always left it open. When she pulled it back, she found damp footprints on the tub floor, child-sized. She called the police, certain someone had broken in, but the door was still locked from the inside. Officers didn't find anyone, but a week later, maintenance discovered a narrow crawl space behind the bathroom wall, with old food wrappers, a blanket, and a small flashlight that had run out of batteries. It's the kind of detail that makes you pause, because there's no horror movie logic here. No ghostly figures appearing in mirrors, no dramatic twist, just quiet, believable dread. That's what makes it worse. The fact that you can picture yourself there, the same hallway, the same creaking floorboards, the same feeling that someone was just standing where you're standing now. There was another report from a college student who used to study late in the library basement. He said one night he heard someone whisper his name. He looked around, but he was alone. The next MO. Ironing, the librarian told him that the building's motion sensors had been going off in that same basement all week, always around the same time he studied there. These aren't the kind of stories you can brush off as superstition. They come from police logs, neighbors' statements, time-stamped videos, all pieces of the same uncomfortable truth, sometimes the most terrifying. Stories don't need monsters or ghosts. Sometimes it's just people, places, and nights that never quite leave you once you've lived through them. There's something about being awake when the rest of the world isn't. You could be sitting in your room at 2 a.m., the glow of your phone lighting your face, and suddenly realize how quiet everything is. No cars, no voices, just the faint hum of the night pressing against your windows. That silence is different. It doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting for something. And in that kind of silence, your thoughts start to sound louder than they should. A man once said the worst part about living alone wasn't the loneliness. It was the nights. He'd fall asleep with the TV on, just to drown out the sound of nothing. But one night, he woke up to realize the TV had shut off. The power was still on, the clock still glowing on the wall, but the screen had gone black. As his eyes adjusted, he saw faint movement reflected in the glass. Something shifting behind him. When he turned, there was nothing there, just the cold emptiness of his living room. But from that night on, he could never sleep without every light in the house turned on. It's strange how isolation changes the way you see things. A hallway you walk through 100 times in the day suddenly feels unfamiliar at night. Shadows stretch differently. Corners feel deeper. Even the sound of your own footsteps seems to echo longer than it should. You start to wonder if it's your mind playing tricks, or if something else is listening from the dark, just out of view. A woman who worked late shifts once described walking home every night through a quiet street. Same route, same time, every evening. One night she felt it, that sense of being followed. She didn't hear anything at first, just the rhythm of her own footsteps. But after a few blocks, there it was. Another set of steps, matching hers perfectly. When she stopped, it stopped. When she turned around, the street was empty. She ran the rest of the way home, locked the door, and peeked through the blinds. The street was still deserted. But when she woke up the next morning, there were fresh shoe prints in the mud beneath her window, leading away from the house. That's the cruel thing about nighttime isolation. It makes you hyper-aware of how small you are. The world outside feels endless, and your house, your room, your bed, they all start to feel like the only light in miles of darkness. You realize how thin the walls really are, how a single sound, a single movement, could mean someone's already inside. And maybe that's why the dead of night feels so personal. It's not just the darkness outside. It's the kind that seeps in slowly until you can tell whether the thing watching you is real, or just the part of you that knows you're not as alone as you want to believe. The scariest part of these stories isn't what was seen or even what was heard. It's what was left behind afterward. The silence that follows, the way the air never feels the same again. Every person who's lived through something like this says the same thing. The night doesn't go back to normal. The house feels different, heavier, as if something stayed when it shouldn't have. And when the lights go out, that's when you feel it most. That quiet certainty that something else is still awake. Maybe it's because the night hides everything we don't want to see. The memories, the fears, the faces we try to forget. It covers them all, until you start to wonder if the darkness is actually keeping them safe, or letting them out. Think about that the next time you're up late, scrolling your phone, half aware of how empty the room around you really is. The shadows on your wall aren't moving, but they don't look still either. You tell yourself it's the light from the screen. You don't turn around, but you don't look away. One guy said after his experience, he started sleeping in his car. Said he couldn't stand the feeling of his house anymore. The sound of the floorboards, the way his doors creaked like someone was leaning against them. He said it was the waiting that got to him. That feeling that the dark was patient, like it was always just outside, counting the seconds until he forgot it was there. He never said what he saw that night, just that he knew if he talked about it again, it would come back. And maybe he was right. Because every time these stories are told, something strange happens. Someone always writes in later saying they heard something while watching, a knock, a whisper, a small shape in the reflection of their screen. Some swear it's coincidence, others say that's how it begins. Small, unexplainable moments that only make sense when it's too late. So if you're still awake right now, maybe take a second to listen. Really listen. Hear that faint sound coming from the other room? The one you've been trying to ignore? Could be the wind, could be the house. But you know your house. You know its sounds, and that one's new. You can turn the lights back on if you want, but it won't make a difference. The dark doesn't need light to find you. It knows where you are. It always has. Because these stories aren't just about what happens to other people. They're reminders, warnings, proof that even when you think you're safe, you're never really alone. Now, go ahead, check your locks, close your curtains, and tell yourself it's over. Just remember, when the world finally goes quiet and the night settles in around you, that's when they start watching back.